What happens when you tie plants to a brick? I'm Tanner the Planter, and this is the truth about houseplants. About a month ago, I tied a whole bunch of different cuttings and plants to this brick to find out what would happen. And there's a lot that really goes into this. I wasn't sure what would happen. Mainly, I wasn't really sure about what would happen with the plant's roots and the reaction to the bricks. I'm not really sure about the process making of a brick, but I've always been curious what would happen. There's two main things that are gonna immediately affect roots when it comes to your plants: oxygen and lack of moisture. So it stands to reason when you have a brick, something that absorbs moisture and is of course full of oxygen, those two things should be very good for roots. So I was hoping that by tying those roots to the brick and filling this saucer full of water, like so, then the water would be soaked up by the brick and the brick would be wet for the roots to cling to. Now, this sort of happens in nature as well. A lot of your houseplants are actually what are called epiphytes, so they like to climb up trees. Each one of these plants actually is an epiphyte. We have a philodendron over here, where it uses its aerial roots to attach to trees to anchor it in, and then it climbs up the tree to compete for light. We have a carnivorous plant over here that does the exact same thing. Right over here, we've got the spider plant, also fantastic little plants, and then in the very back, we've got an orchid. I want to go through each plant and talk about the successes and failures of this brick experiment. First of all, let's start with the orchid. We lost almost all of the leaves, unfortunately, but if you look very closely, we do have a little bud forming right here. So there is finally life. Sometimes it takes a little while for plants to adjust to their new environment, and I'm assuming that's what's happening here, but it will be interesting to see how this form's going on, because actually sometimes orchids will put out new growth because it's about to die. It's saying, oh my gosh, there's so much shock and trauma, we better put out a flower spike to set seed to hopefully continue the lineage, so to speak. So I'm kind of curious to see how that works. Over here, we have the carnivorous plant. This is a carnivorous pitcher plant. The main challenge that I was seeing with this one is that there's not a lot of fertilizer going on. If you know a lot about carnivorous plants, they don't really take the fertilizer that most of these other plants take. They really just rely on catching bugs as their food or their fertilizer. So I wanted to fertilize the other plants, but I wasn't able to quite as well because I didn't want to fertilize the carnivorous plant and kill it off that way. But we've got lots of new growth going on with this carnivorous plant right here. We even have a few pitchers that are forming right here as well. So that's exciting. I want to see how this forms. It's nice because these tropical pitcher plants, one of the things that actually helps them pitcher is higher humidity. And with the water evaporating from the saucer right here, you actually get quite a bit of increased humidity just right around this brick. So that has actually been really good for the plant right here. You might notice when you compare it to the previous video that there's quite a bit of red going on in the leaves. That's sun stress. That's saying the plant is getting very bright light. So this is actually a good sign. I'm very happy with the progress of the carnivorous plant. Moving on to the spider plant. Now this is one that isn't doing quite as well, and that's because if you remember, we took the cutting and it had no roots, or it had just a little bit of nubs of roots. And when the plant doesn't really have any roots, it's not able to uptake moisture to hydrate all of the leaves of the plant. And you can see that the leaves have kind of gone quite soft. They're quite wilted. You might even notice a different color change. They've gone more muted, more minty, so to speak. They've lost a lot of life. But again, if we look very closely, we can see that roots are starting to form right against the brick right here. They're putting out these tiny little hairs that are going to be attaching to the brick. So I think that if those roots can grow out quickly enough to attach to the brick and then take up all that water and the nutrients, that this plant is going to be just fine. I totally see it doing well in the long run. I thought I turned that off. And finally, the plant that I'm most excited about is actually the philodendron. It has put off a couple of new leaves and it's doing tremendously well. The roots have attached nicely to the brick. You can see we've put out some really nice new colorful leaves with another one that's coming on right on top of it. The size is increasing. The plant is very robust and rigid and healthy. Just everything that you would expect from growing it traditionally in a pot of soil, for example. Something that I didn't see coming that I was actually really excited to see, might be alarming to some if you are following along with the experiment. I know plenty of you tagged me in your own videos where you're doing the same experiment, attaching the plants to the brick to see how it turns out with me. I actually found some little mushrooms that are growing along here. Now, I've seen about 5 or 6 different mushrooms that have grown so far, and I actually like mushrooms. Mushrooms have a symbiotic relationship with a lot of plants, especially when it comes to mycelium. Mycelium can help actually plants connect and communicate throughout the forest floor. So it's actually kind of fun to see that sort of replicating itself within our tiny little brick experiment. So if mushrooms don't gross you out, totally just keep them in there. And that goes with your soil as well. You can also keep mushrooms in your soil if you want to. It doesn't really matter if they gross you out, you can take them away as well. But I was excited to see that. Overall, a very successful brick experiment as so far. I know a lot of you have reached out and said, hey, this thing is going well as well. Now let's talk about the reasons why this brick experiment is working and why I thought it would work in the first place. Now, earlier we talked about the importance of root health. A lot of people are concerned about what's going on up here with our leaves because that is what we see and that is how we dictate the health of a plant. But actually, the health of the plant is dictated mostly by the health of your root system, or most immediately by the health of your root system. So what I mean by that is a healthy root system is going to usually come up with a healthy plant, right? So there are a couple of things that roots need to do really, really well immediately. Like I said, they need moisture. Roots need moisture. If they stay too dry for too long, you're going to kill off the roots. And then without any roots, the roots can't take up moisture and nutrients to hydrate the leaves, and then the entire plant dies. The other thing that we need is oxygen. So roots actually need oxygen to live. It's one of those things that they don't talk about a lot. You know, when we're doing our first, second grade lessons, you know, what does it say? What do we say that plants need when we're in first or second grade? Sunlight, moisture, and soil, right? Well, we've debunked at least one of those right now. It doesn't actually need soil. So oxygen is super important. And actually, when we overwater a plant, have you ever heard that term overwater? That really means a lack of oxygen. So you're suffocating your roots. And when we have your roots exposed constantly to air like this, of course, there's tons of oxygen that are flowing through right here. And it's actually more akin, this sort of setup is more akin to what most of these plants would see in nature with their roots constantly being exposed to airflow. So as long as we have the moisture involved with that increased airflow, those are the two main things that these roots are going to need to do really, really well. So I'm excited to see how this continues to go. I think in the future, if I were to do this again or to reset this up, I would actually do it with some different string. This is the main thing that I don't like about this. The string on this one kind of has molded. I would re-wrap it with maybe like a filament line, a fishing line, you know, something clear that's not going to mold. I would probably also use real moss right here as well. That's maybe more for a decorative aspect more than anything. Not a practical. The long fiber sphagnum moss is perfectly fine. It works really well, but just from a decoration aspect, I think I would cover different parts of it in that actual nice green moss, but maybe that's a project for the future. Something I think that would be super fun, or you know, a fun application for this type of setup is to set up a whole bunch of bricks. You could set up a whole little brick city and have plants growing all over your little brick city and constantly sitting in moisture as we have right here. But that is your brick experiment update. Come back next month to see the progress of our brick. Hopefully we've got a nice little flower spike on our orchid. Let me know in the comments, are you doing a brick experiment as well? What do you think about this brick experiment? But until then, slap that subscribe button. That's funny.